Okay, this is my first video, and it's for chapter 1 of the book The Second Founding by Eric Foner. And this chapter is called What is Freedom? The 13th Amendment. Okay, so first I'm going to give a little overview of the notes I took, and then talk about more about the narrative and its connections. So first, I wrote about the people involved. For example, Abraham Lincoln came up a lot, who's the president who issued the Emancipation Proclamation of 1863. Initially supported gradual and compensated emancipation and colonization, but later endorsed immediate emancipation as a war measure. There was also Charles Sumner, radical Republican senator, who proposed an early amendment based on the French Declaration of the Rights of Man and the Citizen and pushed for legal equality. Andrew Johnson, Lincoln's successor, and it was more like a lenient Reconstruction plan that undermined protection of freed people's rights. The Republican Party leaders, Democrats in Congress, and the feminist abolitionists, and how they all played a part in understanding who the U.S. was becoming. And then I wrote a lot about the places and events. For example, the Emancipation Proclamation of 1863 declared emancipation in Confederate states and allowed black enlisted in Union armies, and redefined the war as a moral crusade. There was also the broader states in 1862, the congressional debates of 1863 to 1865, which produced the final 13th Amendment, modeled after the Northwood Ordinance of 1787. And there were also Black Codes of 1865 and the Black Conventions. Um, there was also new ideas and technologies that I wrote about. For example, the gradual versus immediate emancipation, since Lincoln's early plan for gradual emancipation and colonization gave way to immediate um, uncompensated freedom. Federal versus state power, the war and the amendment expanded federal authority to protect civil rights challenges the older state central model. There's also contract labor ideal, enforcement clause, and penal labor exemption, and citizenship in Reimagined, which talks about how freedom was tied to moral and civic equality, setting groundworks for the 14th and 15th Amendment. There's also conflicts that I wrote about, for example, slavery versus freedom, federal authority versus states' rights, and moral idealism versus political programism. Okay, so now I think that's enough well, there's more conflicts, but I think in the purpose or the historical narrative mainly covers that, since the main conflicts I wrote down as being that it centers on the struggle to define what freedom meant after slavery's abolition. The 13th Amendment formally ended slavery, but it's ambiguously, especially the punishment for crime clause, left open the question of whether Americans would realize genuine equality or reinvent servitude under new forms. The connection to historical narrative, I think, is that Foner frames the tensions as opening act of the second founding, a period where the nation tried to rebuild its constitutional and moral foundations. And overall, I think it shows how the abolition of slavery was not a clear-cut victory, but a contested process of redefining citizenship, freedom, power, as well as justice. And it connected the Civil War's emergency measures to the broader Reconstruction projects that we talked about in Gilderman Unit 5, and which is really interesting. Expanding national authority to secure freedom while confronting resistance from entrenched radical and political structures. And another really interesting idea is the 13th Amendment, legacy and its radical promise and its loopholes set up the themes of later chapters of how I noticed how the 14th and 15th Amendments attempted to complete the unfinished work of defining equality, and how the same legal systems that destroyed slavery could also be twisted in a way that led to like racial subjugation. And yeah, that's for chapter one.